In the complex and often heartbreaking narrative of the Middle East, the Israel-Gaza story right now is a study in stark contrasts. It's a story being written in two different languages, on two separate planes of existence that rarely seem to meet. On one side, there is the meticulous language of diplomacy, of clauses and phases written on paper in quiet, air-conditioned rooms. On the other, there is the brutal, non-negotiable language of survival, spoken on dusty, rubble-strewn streets. This is a tug of war, a relentless struggle for dominance not between armies, but between concepts. It is a battle between a deal on paper and a harsh, unyielding reality on the ground. To understand where this conflict might go next, we have to examine both of these worlds, the world of the deal and the world of the reality it is meant to change. First, let's look at the deal side, the architecture of the proposed peace. At its core is a US-brokered multi-phase plan. This isn't a simple agreement, but a complex, sequential roadmap designed to de-escalate the conflict in stages. Each phase is intended to build confidence for the next, creating a fragile momentum toward a more permanent peace. The United States, leveraging its diplomatic weight, has been the primary architect, but it relies on a coalition of key regional mediators. Qatar, a nation that has long maintained open channels with Hamas, serves as a crucial intermediary, translating demands and bridging communication gaps that would otherwise be insurmountable. Egypt, sharing a border with Gaza and holding deep security interests in the region's stability, acts as both a facilitator and a guarantor, particularly concerning border access and security arrangements. And Turkey, another regional power with significant influence and its own strategic interests, has stepped in to apply pressure and offer its own diplomatic channels. Together, these nations have worked to set the terms for an initial ceasefire and a series of exchanges. The first phase of the deal focuses on the most immediate humanitarian concerns. It calls for a temporary but complete cessation of hostilities to allow for the exchange of living Israeli hostages, women, the elderly, and the wounded, for what is reported to be thousands of Palestinian prisoners held in Israeli jails. This part of the deal is a painful calculus of human lives, designed to bring some families closure while releasing others from incarceration. And now, the plan has moved into an even more difficult and somber phase, the trade of remains. This involves the return of deceased hostages in exchange for the bodies of Palestinian militants, a grim necessity for both sides to provide final rights and a semblance of closure to grieving families. On paper, the truce exists. A fragile quiet has descended, but in practice, it is a living, breathing thing that keeps getting stress tested by sporadic strikes, rocket fire, and retaliatory actions. Each violation, no matter how small, threatens to unravel the entire agreement, pulling U.S. officials and regional mediators back into frantic, last-minute shuttle diplomacy to patch the holes and keep the process alive. But if the initial phase is fragile, the future phases are where the entire mechanism jams. These later stages are designed to address the root causes of the conflict, and this is where the fundamental disagreements lie. Disarmament. Governance. The plan explicitly expects Hamas to be removed from all security roles. For Israel and the mediating powers, this is non-negotiable. The vision is for Gaza to be policed by a new, professional and neutral force, potentially trained and overseen by international partners to ensure it cannot pose a threat to Israel. And for the day-to-day administration of Gaza, the running of schools, hospitals, and public utilities, to be handed over to a reformed, technocratic Palestinian authority, separate from the political factions. Here, the deal collides with ideology. Hamas, whose identity is rooted in armed resistance, fundamentally resists any call for disarmament, viewing it as surrender. Simultaneously, Israel's current leadership, citing security concerns and a lack of trust, publicly and emphatically rejects the creation of a sovereign Palestinian state as an outcome of this process. This puts both parties at odds with the overwhelming international consensus. Most UN member states, including key US allies, maintain that a viable two-state solution is the only sustainable endgame that can guarantee long-term security for both Israelis and Palestinians. Now, we turn from the deal to the reality. While diplomats debate clauses, the situation on the ground operates on a different timeline, measured in calories and clean water. Gaza's humanitarian crisis is not just severe, it is catastrophic. Aid organizations have exhausted their superlatives in describing the conditions. According to the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, or IPC, the global standard for measuring food crises, IPC Phase 5 famine has officially hit the north. This is the most severe level, indicating an extreme lack of food, starvation, and death. And while the north is the epicenter, extreme hunger is now a grim reality across the entire strip, affecting hundreds of thousands of people. The ceasefire deal explicitly promised the full, unimpeded flow of humanitarian aid into all parts of Gaza. But the reality is that trucks are still bottlenecked. The promise on paper has not translated into sufficient food on the ground. The Kerem Shalom crossing, a primary artery for aid, moves some supplies into the south, but the volume is a fraction of what is needed to sustain a population of over 2 million people. And due to logistical hurdles, security risks, and access restrictions, the north, the area most desperately in need, often gets none of this aid at all. UN agencies like the World Food Program, or WFP, are working tirelessly, scaling up operations wherever and whenever they can, staging supplies at the border, ready to move. But their efforts are severely hampered. The ban on UNRWA, the main UN agency for Palestinians and historically the largest aid provider in Gaza, from bringing in aid has critically constrained overall capacity. Even if more aid were to get across the border, the internal distribution network is shattered. The physical infrastructure required to move, store, and deliver supplies has been decimated. Key roads are destroyed, warehouses have been reduced to rubble, and the power grid is non-existent, so even the aid that is admitted struggles to reach the people who need it most. This breakdown creates a secondary crisis of law and order, making aid delivery even more perilous. As the humanitarian situation deteriorates, international pressure is spiking to unprecedented levels. A UN-backed commission of inquiry has recently published a report accusing Israeli forces of committing acts that could be construed as genocidal within Gaza. These are allegations, not final legal rulings, but they carry immense moral and political weight. Adding to the legal pressure, Turkey has taken the extraordinary step of issuing arrest warrants for Israel's top political and military leadership, alleging genocide and crimes against humanity. While largely symbolic, this action further isolates Israel among its regional peers. Paradoxically, these moves both intensify the pressure for diplomacy to succeed, while also hardening the positions of those involved, making compromise even more difficult to achieve. Beyond Gaza, the stakes of this conflict continue to widen, threatening to pull in other regional actors. There is persistent, low-level friction on the border with Lebanon, where exchanges of fire with Hezbollah risk escalating into a full-blown second front. Other Iran-backed groups in the region continue to pose a threat, creating a complex web of proxy conflicts. In response, there is a significant U.S. push for a multinational stabilization force to enter Gaza after the fighting stops, with a mandate to retrain and establish a new, local policing authority. For Washington, the overarching strategic aim is to engineer a stable day after in Gaza. The goal is a solution that not only ends the current crisis, but also significantly reduces the risk of a relapse into violence, which would free up American diplomatic and military bandwidth to focus on what it sees as its primary long-term challenges: bigger power competition with China and Russia. So after examining the deal and the reality, where does that leave us? We are left with a fragile ceasefire, a pause in the violence that is holding by a thread and could still break under the weight of its own contradictions. We are left with a desperate race against time to get food in, and medicine, and clean water, before more lives are lost not to the violence of war, but to the silent killers of famine and disease. And we are left with a political map that is fundamentally stuck between a widely endorsed two-state horizon that the international community sees as the only path to peace, and an Israeli government that, for its own political and security reasons, currently says no. Deal versus reality. The abstract versus the immediate. The coming weeks will be critical. They will test the limits of diplomacy, the resilience of the human spirit, and ultimately decide which of these two opposing forces takes the lead.